Hi, I'm Scott Lowe with Actual Tech Media. I'm here today at Pivot3, where I'm joined by Bruce Milne, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for the company. Bruce, thank you for having us in your offices today.
Thanks for taking some time with us.
So this whole hyper-converged thing is really taken off in the market. Over the last few years, we've seen explosive growth of companies like Pivot3, but the market in general has also just expanded pretty dramatically.
Yep.
When you think about Pivot3 and where it plays in the market, hyper-converged is a relatively well-known technology these days, but what's Pivot3 doing to differentiate itself from everyone else that's out there?
Well, there's a couple of things that we're doing, I think, that really distinguish Pivot3 in the marketplace. The first thing is we're doing some very innovative things with the hardware to accelerate the hardware. We're the first to incorporate NVMe, for instance, which increases the performance of applications that you can run on hyperconverged enormously, like by 60 and 70%, in some cases 9 and 10 times faster transactionally than its closest competitor. What that means is that customers can now deploy more demanding applications, database applications, analytics applications, things that previously wouldn't have been the domain of hyperconverged. So in that sense, we're innovating and allowing customers to adopt hyperconverged and get those economies. The real promise is economics and simplicity, and they get those economies and simplicities across a broader set of the applications in the data center. The second place where we're innovating is in how you manage and automate at scale. As you deploy more applications on hyperconverged, being able to manage the deployment of resources against those applications, make sure they perform to their SLAs, is really, really hard. And we've got some techniques for dynamic reprovisioning of resources based on the business priority of that application that allow you to automate all that. So the business people can now get involved in the prioritization of their business services in IT and decide what's more important, what needs to be prioritized to make sure it meets the SLAs at the expense of lower priority applications. Think, for instance, about transaction processing that has to happen in real time because that's the customer experience, right? And if that gets delayed, then you're probably missing out on a sale. That probably takes priority over Exchange delivering email. Email can happen in batch. It can happen with more latency. Yeah. So we can prioritize that, where other vendors in the marketplace are well behind that. They set thresholds on how much resource every application gets, but they don't dynamically reprovision based on business priority. We're also doing some amazing things in taking that capability and extending that well beyond the data center to the cloud. So most organizations of any size are using between 4 and 6 cloud providers today, whether they know it or not, right? There's a lot of shadow IT that's using cloud resources to run business services and applications. IT is trying to facilitate that and make sure that data is secure and that they're using these resources most efficiently. So they want to be able to orchestrate and coordinate where applications are housed, where workloads are positioned in the ecosystem, whether it's on-prem, in the data center, or out there in the cloud at AWS or a place like Iron Mountain or one of those managed service providers. And we're actually helping to orchestrate workloads across the cloud, many clouds that customers are using, as opposed to just in the data center.
I think that what you mentioned, this idea of shadow IT and be able to rein some of that in. As a former CIO, my thoughts on shadow IT are you should embrace it. But you need to control it to a point. And for the reasons you mentioned, security and things like that. It's too easy to get data out there that people don't know is out there. It's too easy to end up with multiple versions of the truth as you have data sets that sort of shard and fracture. So with things like hyperconverged infrastructure, bringing simplicity and enabling the end user to a point too, that's critically important, I think, for people's shadow IT initiatives, especially as we look at digital transformation and things like that, where we're trying to really bring all this stuff organization-wide.
Right.
And I assume that some of the stuff you're doing with Pivot3 and the cloud can help enable some of those efforts to help, as you mentioned, with people to rein this in and control it.
Well, effectively what we want to provide the CIO is a way to provide their customer, their internal customer, with a catalog of services that IT can provide and be a lot more agile and responsive to the needs of the business. The reason that shadow IT exists is because IT can't keep up.
Right.
So if IT can keep up, if you're more responsive, you can quickly reprovision resources, or you can quickly re-architect the data center to support a new application or the growth of that application. Let's say a new feature like capture of a check comes out in a mobile application. All of a sudden, there's a huge amount of demand for that. How quickly can IT respond to that? In the old model, it would take forever to respond to that.
Right.
in the HCI world, they can add more resources and respond very quickly. And so the lines of business can depend on IT and perhaps do less of the shadow IT. There's another concern, though, that CIOs are starting to really get their arms around, and that is compliance and data security and policy. Shadow IT, in many cases, doesn't account for things like HIPAA compliance in a healthcare customer. You can't have patient data sitting on a data center in some other country. It has to be locked down and be encrypted at rest and in motion. Those are the types of policies that need to be applied, and IT has the rigor and structure to apply those policies. What we're doing is automating that so that that set of services and those constraints can all be managed within a single framework. That's a huge advantage for CIOs to help deal with whether it's a problem or a sort of corollary set of services around shadow IT. They can embrace it and extend it.
Let's step back for a second. I mean, all this stuff you're talking about with Pivot3 and what it can do, it has some roots. Tell us a little about where Pivot3 started and how you got to where you are now with all the things we've just been talking about.
Pivot3 is really the convergence of two distinct companies that came together, two innovative companies that have brought a set of technologies together to produce what we think is the market-leading platform. Pivot3 was started about 13 years ago by some founders that came out of HP and prior to that Compaq that were defining the first generation of software-defined storage. At the same time, there was another company being created called Left Hand Networks, and they are now the software-defined storage product for HP across the board. Pivot3 company had identified a beachhead application, an opportunity for using software-defined storage for massive data capture and management, and that was the transition from analog to digital video for video surveillance. It was creating enormous amounts of data. The data centers were being overwhelmed. This is a great problem to solve with software-defined storage. So we continued to optimize that solution to be able to handle streaming media, which obviously sets us up very nicely to be able to support IoT, smart cities, safe cities, all these initiatives that are predicated on streaming media, sensors, applications that require video as the basis, like facial recognition, license plate recognition, and so forth. That also has a heavy analytics component, so processing is going to be important as well. So the balance between storage and processing and how hyperconverged works, really nicely tuned for those types of applications. We became a leader in that market. To this day, we are one of the leading brands in the world for video surveillance, data capture, and management. But what evolved out of that set of innovations was a hyper-converged platform that combines software-defined storage, virtualization, and all the management elements required to effectively manage that and simplify the administration of it. Combine that with the ultimately what Left Hand became, which is a company called NextGen. We brought those two companies together a year and a half ago and combined some of the unique innovations around quality of service, dynamic reprovisioning, the NVMe data paths, all of that together into a single platform in the past year, which has been enormously successful and popular in market.
Pivot3 was hyperconverged before hyperconverged was a word. And you've taken NextGen and integrated it very nicely in all the platforms I'm seeing, or the platform I'm seeing from Pivot3 today. And it's impressive. And I'm sure it's impressive to your customers. I mean, you're seeing significant growth. But when you think about your customers, who are they? Like, who's a typical Pivot3 customer? And what sort of needs do they have that they're coming to Pivot3 to have addressed?
Our customers range from people in the security markets, that might be state and local governments, to people in commercial enterprises like logistics companies, anybody with a large IT plant like financial services. So we see a lot of business sort of evenly spread across many, many verticals. I would say that state and local and federal government and public spaces would represent probably 30% of our business. There's a lot of business in logistics and transportation, a lot of business in gaming and hospitality. So across a broad spectrum of vertical markets. The buyers for that tend to, it used to be when you sold storage, you sold it to a storage capacity planner or somebody who was an administrator for storage. And they bought based on specifications. And price per terabyte was sort of the metric that they used, and they would look at differentiating features. What we see today, though, is CIOs getting very involved, chief architects getting very involved, perhaps physical security if this is a surveillance or safe city type initiative. But largely, it's a more senior audience that we're talking to because they're talking about fundamentally restructuring how they do IT. Right. Providing a catalog of services to their line of business customers internally. That's a very different conversation than buying some additional storage. So we see a very executive level committee and a lot of collaboration with stakeholders. So we're often selling to a committee of line of business plus IT at a very senior level.
I think early on in hyperconverged, people were going after the storage admin because it was seen as reshaping storage. And as you said today, I think we're definitely seeing more senior people looking at this as an opportunity for the organization, not just to do something different with storage.
Well, and they have to think about the skills differential in the data center. Do they need the same specialized skills they had previously? This is a great opportunity for small and medium enterprises to really increase the level of sophistication of their IT. Previously, they would have needed specialized skills that they can't attract and they can't afford to retain.
Right.
So if you're a police precinct, for instance, it might be difficult to get really advanced IT services unless you outsource that. What hyperconverged brings to them is simplicity so that they can deploy this stuff and manage it without a lot of specialized skills. That changes the game completely because now they can offer a set of services internally that previously they would have had to outsource.
And so that's one of the key business drivers for this, is helping drive some simplicity and operational efficiency through the organization. What are some of the other business outcomes you see people enjoying from deployment of hyperconverged infrastructure?
What's really interesting to me when I get to talk to customers is to hear the business outcomes that they're focused on. So for instance, one of our customers at Southern New Hampshire Health was a CIO who is actually an MD. And his priority was reducing the amount of time that his physicians had to spend on IT because they're physicians. They're a scarce resource, more time with patients. So his primary directive was reduce the amount of time they spend logging into applications at the point of care, in a clinic, in the ER, in their office hours, and free up that time to spend it more with patients. What we did was increase by about 2 hours per day per physician the amount of time they spend in front of patients. Now, the technology behind that was virtual desktops with faster boot up times, very efficient density. So we doubled the density that they're able to achieve on the same infrastructure for the number of desktops. That's all the technology in the background. The ultimate outcome, though, was an increase by 2 hours of the time that a physician can give to patients. That's their primary driver.
Right.
For one of the largest logistics companies in the world, you probably see one on every street corner. They deploy a new store pretty frequently, and they deploy an array of Pivot3 gear in each one of those stores. It's pre-imaged with all their applications, pick and pack applications, point of sale applications, their HVAC, their surveillance. All of that comes in a pre-configured set of computers. And we ship an array like that to every one of those stores. They can now set that up in the span of 2 hours, where previously it would have been 2 days. So the business outcome for them was being very dynamic and responsive to market dynamics. So they can set up a boutique shop at, for instance, the X Games in the span of 2 hours. Plug in a Cat5 cable in the power cord, and you've got your compute infrastructure, where previously it would have taken them a couple of days. So that level of agility and responsiveness changes the game for them. It's a very competitive market for them. That gives them a competitive leg up.
The other thing that's happening in the market today is a lot of cloud stuff. I mean, obviously people are looking at the public cloud, but they're looking at the private cloud as well. We're seeing people transition back from the public cloud to the private cloud. Where do you see Pivot3 playing in people's cloud plans and the organizational moves back and forth between the cloud?
Pivot3 will play an instrumental role in helping automate the decision process of where to optimally place workloads and data to best effect, based on all your constraints, right? Your constraints might be compliance constraints, cost constraints, performance and response time constraints. All those things need to be taken into account when you want to, achieve the economics of moving to the cloud. Well, in some cases, cloud is more expensive. And we understand the cost implications of using some of those cloud resources or orphaning a VM in the cloud. So Pivot3 will track all that, manage the migration of workloads to the appropriate cloud resource or to your private cloud internally, depending on where's the best place to achieve your goals. Your goals might be response time for that application. Your goal might be reduce the cost. This is cold storage. It's evidence that I may not use for another 6 months. So put it someplace where it costs me the least to store it. If it's a very active application, it's got heavy processing requirements, maybe it needs to be close to the data collection point. Maybe you need to move it out to the edge. In some cases, you want to bring it back in centrally because you're doing a massive big data type application. So we will help make those automated decisions for the customer and reduce the amount of physical effort required to do that.
And are you actually doing the data moves as well between cloud, edge, and data center?
Yeah, I mean, the decision management application is of no use if you don't also execute it for them.
Right. I mean, I wasn't sure if it was a set of recommendations or if it was actually doing
and this is in high demand. I mean, we see a lot of customers today using the cloud for DR. disaster recovery. That's sort of the first killer application
Absolutely.
for cloud in the data center. But now we're seeing customers say, well, perhaps I can move more of my business services there, more of the data that I don't use very often, it's not very active, or perhaps there are higher priced cloud services that are higher performing, but I use them for shorter times. So people are starting to make informed decisions. At scale, they need automation. That's what Pivot3 provides.
Now, I've heard a lot about your partner program. Can you tell us a little about the partner program and how it really benefits partners and customers?
Pivot3's partner channel program has grown enormously in the past 2 years. In fact, the second half of 2017, we've just finished, we grew the channel contribution to our pipeline by 275%. So it's growing at an increasing rate. Partners are signing up because they see the opportunity in hyperconverged. They're very anxious to be part of that ecosystem. And they see us as a differentiated product in market. So that's good for the partners. We have a very sophisticated channel program that provides spiffs. It provides all kinds of self-service applications, deal registration, all the things you would expect from a much larger company. And that provides the partner all the convenience they need to be self-sufficient, get the assistance they need to understand our value proposition. We have vertical expertise and situational fluency in markets that we can provide to them, both through training and certification and also through industry experts in the marketplace. So they value that. For our customers, of course, that provides a much broader spectrum of choice for the platform they want to work on. Right? We work with Lenovo, we work with Dell, we work with Supermicro, depending on the requirements of that customer. We platform different ways. We work with integrators and VARs and resellers in various vertical markets that are close to the customer, understand the customer needs better than we do. So that provides great customer choice. And we believe it also improves customer service. So, we work very closely with our partners to make sure that the customer experience is a very high quality customer experience. We track that every week. We make sure that all of our partners have every tool they need and all the training they need to provide that exceptional customer experience.
What's next for Pivot3?
Well, cloud is obviously a big part of the equation going forward. Pivot3 is on a very steep growth curve, and so we need to sustain that. For a company on the grow, of course, that means you're constantly retooling and redefining business process. That gets a lot of our attention. The expansion into other geographies is very exciting. So we're doing some smart cities initiatives in Latin America and Africa and the Middle East that are very, very exciting. And we think that the central decision making in some of those countries facilitates them moving faster in some of these big centralized initiatives, but we'll see more of that in the US and Canada over the next couple of years. So I believe that the enormous growth we're seeing in smart cities and safe cities and IoT is going to translate to North America in the very near term. We have a global presence that we're expanding very fast with some of our strategic partners like Lenovo. So we're excited about that. The enablement challenge of making sure that all those folks are equipped to take this value proposition to market is a fun challenge. But just generally, all of the elements of growth are definitely top of mind for us.
Bruce, thank you very much for this journey into the history and present and future of Pivot3.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
And we thank you for watching.